The resurrection at Jerez, Marc Marquez and the sprint that rewrote the record books. There are moments in motorsport that transcend the stopwatch. Moments that reach past the data sheets, the sector times, the telemetry readouts, and grab you somewhere deeper, somewhere in the gut, somewhere primal and unscientific. Jerez de la Frontera, April 2026 gave the world one of those moments, not a gentle nudge toward greatness, a thunderclap. This is not a summary of events. This is testimony. What unfolded across 12 rain-soaked laps of the Circuito de Jerez during the Spanish Grand Prix sprint is the kind of narrative that racing historians will excavate from the archives for decades, holding it up to the light, turning it over in their hands, marveling at how something this extraordinary could have actually happened in real time. Act 1, the stage is drenched and the cast is loaded. The Andalusian sky opened its floodgates with the particular cruelty that only a Mediterranean spring can deliver, without warning, without preamble, without apology. The asphalt at Jerez transformed from a forgiving ribbon of tarmac into a treacherous, reflective menace. Teams scrambled. Engineers barked into headsets. The entire paddock recalibrated in real time. 12 laps, that's all. A sprint race is not a grand opera. It is a knife fight in a telephone booth, tight, violent, unforgiving of hesitation. And on this particular afternoon, the protagonists could not have been more cinematically assembled if a scriptwriter had spent months crafting the lineup. Marc Marquez, aboard his Ducati, was positioned near the sharp end of the field, his riding carrying that unmistakable ferocity that seasoned observers have come to recognize as a very specific kind of danger signal. He was not merely competing. He was calculating. Every fraction of a second, every apex, every breaking point, all of it processed through a mind that functions differently than virtually anyone else who has ever strapped on a helmet at this level. And ahead of him, Alex, his own brother, his blood. Act 2, the Brotherhood at War. Let us pause here because the dimension of sibling rivalry threading through this race deserves more than a footnote. The two Marquez brothers, Marc, the elder, the 7-time world champion, the man whose left arm was surgically reconstructed more than once, who spent entire seasons in the wilderness questioning whether the career was over, and Alex the younger, the one who has stepped steadily out of his brother's enormous shadow and carved his own legitimate identity as a frontrunner, were engaged in something that no contractual arrangement, no commercial narrative, no broadcast package could fully capture. Family competition is the oldest competitive fire in human civilization. It predates organized sport by millennia, and when that particular combustion is witnessed through the lens of a wet, slippery, consequential motorsport event, it produces a kind of electricity that is genuinely irreplaceable. Marc was hunting Alex through the corners of Jerez with an urgency that went beyond championship mathematics. His body language on the bike, visible even through the layers of leather, helmet, and rain-soaked air, radiated something raw and unfiltered, not spite, not animosity, but the particular concentrated intensity of someone who absolutely refuses to be second best, not to anyone, and certainly not to his own kin. The cameras caught fragments, the data captured sectors, but the full emotional weight of that pursuit was something felt rather than measured. Act 3, Turn 13 bites. With 6 circuits remaining, the universe inserted its signature plot device. Marc Marquez, running in second position, locked in his internal calculation, reading the track and the gap ahead, arrived at turn 13 on tires that had been enduring conditions they were never engineered to withstand. The slick rubber underneath him had been slowly, silently accumulating a debt that turn 13 collected in full. The Ducati went down. Carbon fiber met asphalt. The machine slid. The world lurched into that horrible suspended instant where breath catches and time stretches. The critics who had spent years drafting his professional obituary, who had watched the surgeries, the rehabilitation, the faltering early races on undersized machinery, all of them in that singular moment, felt the corners of their mouths begin to twitch upward. There it is, they must have thought, finally. They miscalculated, catastrophically. Act 4, the decision that only one person on Earth would make. What happened in the next several seconds represents, arguably, the single most audacious mid-race cognitive maneuver in the history of premier-class motorcycle racing. Marc Marquez rose from the pavement. He examined his battered Ducati handlebar geometry distorted, integrity compromised, with the dispassionate efficiency of a field surgeon assessing a casualty. He did not panic. He did not gesticulate at marshals. He did not stand at the side of the circuit wearing the defeated expression of a man whose afternoon has ended. He ran a calculation. The calculation went something like this: the field is passing. The pit lane is accessible. There is another Ducati in that pit lane equipped with wet weather tires. There are 6 laps left. 6 laps is time enough. And time enough in the vocabulary of Marc Marquez is a phrase that means something fundamentally different than it does for anyone else. He remounted the crippled machine, not to limp around and score points, not to salvage dignity or placate sponsors. He remounted it with a specific lethal purpose: to navigate deliberately toward the exterior boundary of turn 13, wait for the entire field to complete its passage beyond him, and then execute a controlled lateral crossing of the circuit, transitioning from racetrack to pit lane access. Measured, premeditated, executed with the composure of someone who has rehearsed adversity so many times that catastrophe has become familiar territory. He rode into the pit lane, fresh motorcycle, wet compound tires, and the trajectory of the entire sprint race bent in a direction nobody in the grandstands, nobody watching through broadcast cameras, nobody in any garage had anticipated. This was, for the historical record, the first flag-to-flag sprint in MotoGP history. A moment without precedent, created not by regulation or circumstance, but by the autonomous will of one particular individual. Act 5: The Charge. What followed defies comfortable description, which is perhaps appropriate given that the event itself defied comfortable categorization. Marquez rejoined the circuit with cold tires, a freshly swapped motorcycle, and a time deficit that would have extinguished the ambitions of any rational competitor. He was not working with seconds. He was working with fractions of seconds, squeezing every available milligram of grip from tires that needed heat cycles to perform, threading his way through traffic with a precision that suggested he was operating on information unavailable to mortal observers. And then, because apparently the universe decided the story required one additional flourish, he overtook Francesco Bagnaia on the same lap as his pit lane re-entry. Not after he had settled in, not after the tires had cycled through their warming phase. On that very lap, still in the embryonic stages of his comeback, with rain still descending and risk still permeating every square centimeter of that track, he went through on the inside, claimed the lead, and proceeded to extend it. He crossed the finish line 3.1 seconds ahead of Bagnaia. In a 12-lap sprint race. After crashing. After pitting. After everything. Act 6: The Mathematical Absurdity. Let us sit with those numbers for a moment because they deserve sustained contemplation. 12 laps total, 6 laps remaining when the crash occurred. In those 6 laps, Marquez fell from his motorcycle at racing speed, physically remounted a structurally compromised machine, navigated to the pit lane entrance, conducted a complete motorcycle swap in the box, exited onto a live racing circuit, overtook the field leader, and constructed a winning margin of over 3 seconds. The arithmetic of this achievement is not merely impressive, it approaches incoherence. The time losses alone, crash, remount, navigation, pit stop, tire warming, should have consigned him to an irrelevant position in the results sheet. Instead, they produced the race winner. Marquez himself, in his post-race debrief, acknowledged that his prolonged commitment to slick tires in deteriorating conditions had been an error in judgment. He said it plainly, without deflection or qualification. He was wrong about the tires, and the crash was the consequence of that miscalculation. But here is what separates this particular mind from the field. In the hands of Marc Marquez, a mistake is not simply a mistake. It is also, on certain occasions, the precise catalyst that transforms an ordinary afternoon into something unforgettable. His error created the pit lane opportunity. His misfortune became the architecture of his triumph. Act 7: The Controversy That Wasn't. No extraordinary victory in this sport passes without challenge, and the Spanish Grand Prix sprint generated its share of post-race scrutiny. Social media platforms erupted. Opinion segments aired across European sports networks, and among the most vocal contributors was Johan Zarco, the LCR Honda representative who had qualified second on the grid and finished 8th, a trajectory that itself contains a certain quiet eloquence. Zarco's argument, delivered on Canal Plus with evident conviction, was that Marquez's movement toward turn 13's exterior and subsequent pit lane entry constituted a violation, that having already committed to continuing on the circuit, revering course to access the pits was impermissible. The argument has surface plausibility. It also has structural flaws that the FIM race stewards identified when they conducted their investigation. The race direction documentation circulated to every team before the Spanish Grand Prix specified, with unambiguous clarity, the regulations governing pit lane access. The interior white boundary at pit entry must remain unbroken by any competitor's line. The exterior white boundary restriction applies exclusively to pit lane exit, not entry. Marquez's trajectory at no point intersected the prohibited interior boundary. He made contact with no green-painted surface, which would have triggered an automatic penalty under standing regulations. No marshal issued any instruction directing him to halt or hold position. In the absence of any of those violations, the stewards returned the only verdict the evidence supported: no further action. Zarco's suggestion that Marquez was simply fortunate, rather than tactically brilliant, prompted, among devoted observers of the sport, a particular kind of weariness. The language of luck is frequently deployed when conventional analytical frameworks cannot accommodate what has just been witnessed. It functions as a cognitive escape hatch, a way of protecting the assumption that extraordinary outcomes require extraordinary external assistance rather than extraordinary internal competency. If there is a chance Marc grabs it, that phrase captures the essence more accurately. It is not fortune. It is the capacity to perceive opportunity within chaos that others cannot see, combined with the nerve to act on that perception instantaneously and completely. Act 8: Bagnaia and the hierarchy that numbers cannot fully express. Francesco Bagnaia is a former world champion. He is a rider of formidable technical ability, extraordinary consistency, and genuine tactical intelligence. He rides factory Ducati machinery, the same manufacturer, the same fundamental technical platform as Marquez. He finished second in a sprint race at his team's home circuit. On paper, first and second for Ducati sounds harmonious. Inside the paddock, in the garages, in the private conversations that occur behind closed pit lane doors, everyone who watched that race understands the actual meaning of the gap. 3.1 seconds in 12 laps on identical machinery. And the man who built that gap had spent lap 6 crashing, remounting, navigating a damaged motorcycle to the pit lane, conducting a bike swap, re-entering the circuit, and overtaking the leader. All of that contained within the same time frame that produced a 3.1-second deficit for the man who had been riding clean and uninterrupted. There is a hierarchy being demonstrated here that transcends the specific conditions of this specific race. It is a hierarchy of cognitive architecture, of how different people process identical information, identical adversity, and identical opportunity, and arrive at outcomes that diverge by measurable, documented margins. Bagnaia is elite. Bagnaia will win championships. But on days when chaos descends and the predetermined order of things dissolves, there remains, it appears, only one Marc Marquez. Act 9: The Wider Arc. Marc Marquez's professional narrative contains more material than most careers could absorb and remain coherent. He won 6 Premier-class world championships with Honda across a decade. He suffered a career-threatening arm injury at Jerez in 2020, at this very circuit, that required multiple surgeries, extensive rehabilitation, and years of diminished physical capability. He made the controversial and widely scrutinized decision to depart Honda, accept a secondary Ducati satellite placement, and rebuild his competitiveness from the foundation upward. The critics who characterized that transition as desperate were not entirely without logic. Moving from factory machinery to a satellite squad is not a conventional path to revival, but those critics were applying conventional frameworks to an unconventional individual. He earned the factory Ducati seat. He did so through performance rather than negotiation. And now, at Jerez 2026, at the same circuit where his arm was shattered 6 years prior, he produced the most jaw-dropping sprint race result in the brief but rapidly expanding history of that format. The symmetry is almost theatrical. The location where his body nearly ended his career has become, twice now, the backdrop for demonstrations of why the career was worth preserving. Act 10: What this moment means. You will not encounter mornings like this in every season, perhaps not in every decade. The convergence of narrative elements at Jerez, the family rivalry, the crash, the rule-legal pit maneuver, the unprecedented flag-to-flag format, the winning margin, the wholesale refutation of everyone who questioned whether he still belonged at the summit of this sport, that convergence occurs at a frequency that makes it effectively unrepeatable. The individuals who spent years composing arguments for why Marquez was finished, why the injuries had permanently eroded his edge, why the championship window had definitively closed, watched this afternoon in silence. There is no graceful editorial response to what they witnessed. The counterargument cannot be filed on a form, it cannot be submitted to any review panel. It was delivered at 200 kilometers per hour in the rain on a borrowed motorcycle at the site of his greatest physical catastrophe, against his own brother, past a factory teammate with a winning gap that made the result look almost comfortable. Almost. He did not celebrate the way a person celebrates unexpected fortune. He celebrated the way a person celebrates the confirmation of something they always believed was true. The fist pump, the gesture to the sky, the expression beneath the visor, these are not the behaviors of someone surprised by their own outcome. They are the behaviors of someone who always knew.